Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. After nearly 3 hours of talks in Alaska, Trump says we didn't get there and repeats no deal until there's a deal. Putin claims he is sincerely interested in ending the war but gives no details. In a Fox News interview after the summit, Trump tells Ukrainian President Zelensky to take responsibility for striking an agreement. He says any future talks must include European involvement. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov describes the talks as very positive and a path to move forward. Putin says the summit marks the beginning of a possible resolution and closer US-Russia relations. Trump says a deal could include prisoner exchanges, claiming he was shown a list of thousands who may be released. He puts the odds of success at 50-50, saying Putin wants to solve the crisis. Trump says he rated the meeting 10 out of 10 and said he got along great with Putin, but he admits one big issue blocked a ceasefire, and critics say Putin walked away with the bigger win. The summit ended without questions from the press, but with Trump promising to see Putin again soon, he replied in English, saying next time in Moscow, drawing attention to future talks. Trump claims China's President Xi Jinping told him in Beijing that he will not invade Taiwan while he's in office. He made the remarks in a Fox News interview. Melania Trump sends a letter to Putin. White House officials say Melania Trump wrote a personal letter to Vladimir Putin highlighting the plight of children in Ukraine and Russia. President Trump handed it to Putin during their Alaska summit. We start with our top story of the day, where President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin ended their highly anticipated summit in Alaska without a ceasefire or roadmap to peace in Ukraine. Both claimed progress but offered no details. Trump told reporters we didn't get there, while calling the talks a 10 out of 10 and saying a deal was still possible. Putin expressed he was sincerely interested in ending the war but gave no plan. Both leaders avoided questions, leaving key issues unanswered. In a Fox News interview, Trump floated a prisoner swap and said territorial arrangements were discussed, calling the meeting very warm and claiming they were close to a deal. Yet he stressed any agreement depends on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was not invited. The Kremlin later called the summit very positive, where spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the leaders gave exhaustive statements explaining why no questions were taken and insisted their talks would allow them to confidently move forward on a peace settlement. Reaction was sharply divided. Analysts said Putin gained prestige, while Trump left with zero. With Kyiv silent and no new steps announced, the war's future remains uncertain. The red carpet greeting in Anchorage provided the drama but not the substance. We now have some breaking news coming in. The White House has said that Trump is on the phone with NATO leaders after a lengthy call with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. We're now joined by Rohan Gunaratne, who's an international affairs expert. He joins us live from Singapore to discuss this further. Thank you, Rohan, for joining us here on the program. Many analysts, commentators are saying that in reality, it was Ukraine who won these talks due to the fact that no territory was conceded and that Donald Trump floated the idea of a trilateral summit between the Russian president himself and the Ukrainian president. What are your thoughts on that statement?
Thomas, this is a major breakthrough that the two leaders of America and Russia met on the question of Ukraine. So the critics of Trump and Putin, they must understand that peace is as tough as victory in war. That is, this is the phase one of that negotiation. And they achieved something very important. That is, they built a very good relationship. And not only that, President Trump's wife, Melania's letter was given to Putin, explaining the tragedy for the children, both in Russia and in Ukraine. And the next phase of this meeting is to bring Zelensky in. So I believe that this summit is a victory in the direction of peace. It is a summit that should be praised. It is a summit that is going to one day make peace between these two countries. Europe and Russia has been at war. When the threat to Russia recedes, when the European leaders better understand the concerns of Russia, then the fighting will end. So there must be a structured peace process. Ukraine is only the battleground. We have to look at the larger forces that is driving these two entities, the Russian and the European or the Western entity, into this kind of war and conflict.
Yes, indeed, Rohan. We're joined by Yulia Kazdabina, who's a senior fellow at the Ukrainian Prism. She joins us live from the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. Thank you very much, Julia, for joining us on the program. We have not yet heard from Volodymyr Zelensky and his statements following this this summit between the Ukrainian and United States presidents. However, what are the people of Ukraine saying? What are their thoughts about the outcomes of this? Donald Trump's statements in saying that he wants a trilateral summit with Putin and himself, and also Zelensky included as well, of course.
I mean, those are just words. We'll see how he's going to get there. Because so far he has not been able to accomplish anything, and I could not agree less with the statements of the previous speaker who said that this was a victory for the peace process, because there is no peace process. There is President Trump who wants to make a deal, and there is President Putin who does not want to make a deal, and who is trying to manipulate the process as much as he wants. As much as he's able. And we see signs of that, because he's not talking about peace in Ukraine. He's talking with President Trump about things that please him. And I mean the fact, the claim that 2020 elections were falsified, and how great President Trump is, and all these things. But when it comes to the situation on the ground, Russian demands do not change. They're still the same. And that's the reason why this summit ended without any deal, and not even a ceasefire. And actually, Russian attacks continued while they were talking, and they continue now. So Russia does not want peace, and all this talk about there being a threat to Russian security, that's a made-up excuse for the war. Because if we're talking about NATO expansion to the east, NATO is a defensive alliance, and the key article of the NATO alliance is Article 5, which is an attack on one is an attack on everybody. So it means that if one country gets attacked, then everybody will join that country in defending it. So it's not an alliance that's going to attack Russia. Also, if you look at the state of NATO's defense industry now, you can clearly see that they were not preparing for a major war. And the state of their militaries, the clear indication that they were not preparing for a major war, unlike Russia. So all this talk about taking Russia's security considerations seriously, those are not security considerations. Those are made-up excuses to justify aggression in an imperial war. So, and no progress was achieved in these talks with regard to stopping this aggression.
Yes, Julia, in regards to that aggression, we have some breaking news that have just come in just a few moments ago, where Russia has launched 85 attack drones and a ballistic missile at Ukraine overnight. That's what Kiev said just now. Ukraine's Air Force have said that Moscow had attacked with an Iskander-M ballistic missile and 85 Shahed-type drones. while also attacking frontline areas in 4 regions. Rohan, I wanted to come back to you with that breaking news. Obviously, it was all smiles in Alaska, with a backdrop behind the behind the Russian president and the United States president saying securing peace. Their actions don't say otherwise. However, do you think Vladimir Putin is really serious about a peace deal, or is this just him stalling for time?
Russians are serious about a peace deal. Russia doesn't want the constant attacks against Russia. Ukrainians are committed to a peace deal. They don't want their own cities and their citizens being killed. But certainly there is a geopolitical dispute between Russia and Europe. It is true that a devastating attack took place immediately after these talks. But I believe that these talks will move forward the peace deal. It is because neither side can win. Russia can never win in a war against the West. The West cannot win a war against the Russians. So peace is the only way. Certainly Putin wants a peace deal because he doesn't want to leave office with Russia and Europe at war. And if there is no peace, that is the direction this conflict is going to head. It's going to expand into the rest of Europe. Trump knows that, and many European leaders know that. Many security and intelligence services that are disrupting Russian plots on European soil, they know that this is a war that is going to lead to descent to chaos. And that is why this summit is an important summit.
Julia, I wanted to come back to you, your immediate reaction to this fresh barrage of attacks from Russia onto Ukrainian territory, especially with the global news media, some of which are hailing Donald Trump for his peace negotiations, while we have had no outcome of these talks. And as you said, only possible statements that Donald Trump has said, which are very much known to be unpredictable, unreliable. Julia, what is the feeling in Ukraine right now, given that these talks have come to an end?
Well, they went just as expected. I mean, we have been dealing with Russians for a very, very long time, and so we know their negotiation tactics, and we know President Trump's weaknesses. And so when you talk to people at the front line, they all said that we do not see any change in Russian behavior, and we do not even discuss those peace talks among ourselves because Russia continues attacking and it's not going to change. And so that's exactly what happened. We saw President Putin reap the publicity benefits of being received like a king at the US soil, but not making any concessions and not making any steps towards a peace deal. But I mean, we also need to understand that when Putin talks about a deal, he talks about a deal between the US and Russia, and Ukraine not being a subject of that deal. And when President Trump talks about a deal, he talks about a deal between Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine being subject in this deal. And so I think that's a major contradiction, and that's not going to let this situation be resolved. And Putin is going to continue manipulating, talking about wanting a deal, but at the same time not making any concessions.
Yes, thank you very much, Julia. We're also joined by Dr. Ajay Dua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Dr. Dua, thank you for joining us. Your viewpoint on the outcome of the summit with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, where it was all smiles. However, this update has just reminded us that hostility has not stopped. Securing peace was the motto, but not the practice. Dr. Dua, your analysis of this?
I think it's a beginning. Where it gets, we don't know. There's a high degree of uncertainty about it. People expected, particularly in the West, that a lot would come out of the summit. including a ceasefire, would be agreed to by Russia. I thought that that was a rather a tall order. A war which has been going on for 3.5 years, a lethal war with no holds barred, was bound to take some time to even have effect a ceasefire amongst the forces at each other's throat, virtually. Therefore, I would say that the first talk between the two presidents is a mere beginning. Where it goes, how it goes, depends upon a lot of factors. And one of those is going to be, as far as we are talking about Ukraine, that the stand of the Ukrainian president and his country is as a very material aspect. No one in the world has the right to arrive at an agreement on what parts of Ukraine should be given away, what should be retained. Yes, the Russians would demand, and probably they have made a demand yesterday, that all the 6 states or 6 provinces which are under their occupation should be given to them, which rightly probably was resisted by President Trump, because the land doesn't belong to him, that it belongs to the elected people and their leaders of Ukraine. They have not yet been taken into confidence. The fact that they have agreed to meet once again, and President Putin has offered Moscow as the next site, the next venue. Hopefully they will meet, and there we would have President Zelensky also there with his advisors. Like earlier it was thought that only the meeting is going to be one-to-one, but then 3 advisors from each side were there to help out the presidents. And the Russians have probably gone happy that nothing was conceded and nothing was demanded from them beyond putting forward a proposal. President Putin was also happy that nothing was forced upon him and nothing was made conditional, saying, unless you do this, we will not go forward. Probably the only place where some such thing was said was when President Putin wanted to talk about business relationships between the US and Russia. He was reminded that
Dr. Dewar, I do apologise. We have some news for our audience. The White House has dismissed claims made by Fox News regarding the recent summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump, calling them total fake news. Stephen Chung, White House Director of Communications, responded to Fox News correspondent Jacquai Heinrich's comments, which suggested the talks held in Anchorage, Alaska, were unsuccessful, with Heinrich describing the atmosphere as tense and unproductive. The summit, which lasted over 3 hours, primarily focused on the ongoing Ukrainian conflict and aimed at renewing bilateral relations. Despite differing perspectives on the meeting's outcome, both leaders acknowledged progress, though no agreement was reached on all issues. We are once again joined by Rohan Gunaratne. Rohan, as we've said, there has been no agreement reached on anything on the agenda. No deal on Ukraine, no ceasefire, no nuclear deal, which was floated as a possibility here. How can this be seen as a success for Donald Trump, especially can be seen as a success for Vladimir Putin, as it could be seen as his introduction on the world stage. However, for Donald Trump, how can this be viewed as a success?
Thomas, at the very first meeting, there will be no success because Zelensky was not present. With regard to Ukraine, if there's going to be a deal, Zelensky must be there. Other NATO partners should be there because that is one of Russia's concerns. So in the Moscow summit, certainly there can be progress because Zelensky will participate in that meeting. This is just the very beginning of a structured peace process that will lead to something positive. It is because the meeting of these two leaders itself, and they decided to meet, to have the next meeting in Moscow. That itself is progress. Certainly, Putin has his interests, Trump has his interests, and Zelensky has also his interests. But this is the very beginning. So I don't think anyone should say that this meeting is not successful, that Trump and Putin meeting is a success. The very fact two world leaders met to discuss Ukraine itself is something that is commendable, something that should be praised, something a process that is moving in the right direction.
Yes, well, indeed. Can I get your thoughts, Julia, on this? That Donald Trump has slammed Fox News for the outcome of this summit, which can be seen as unsuccessful, as of course there has been no agreements reached on the agenda whatsoever.
Well, I agree with that assessment that this was not a successful summit, and I totally disagree with this narrative that the fact of the meeting is progress, because there were many meetings and they never led to anything because of Russia's position and because of Russia's approach to negotiations. And it was already mentioned in this discussion that Russia wants to take control of the territories it has occupied, but this is not true. Russia wants to take control of the territories that it has not occupied, that are still under Ukrainian control, and that once Ukrainian troops withdrawn from Ukrainian territories, from those oblasts that Russia occupied only partly. And so this is and I'm pretty confident that Russia continued making these demands, and that the summit would not have been a success. Putin definitely tried to derail it and to distract attention from the issues that Donald Trump wanted to discuss. So, but both sides were interested in portraying it as some sort of a progress. For Putin, that was important because this is coming back to the international stage and gaining more legitimacy. And to President Trump, it was important because he does not want to admit he failed, but it is a failure.
Yes. We now move on to some more news. We have some international reactions coming in regard to the summit. In the hours after it ended without a ceasefire deal, European reactions were guarded. Norway's foreign minister said it was too soon to judge any progress and called for maintaining and even increasing pressure on Russia over its war in Ukraine. This came as Czech's defense minister stated that talks in Alaska confirmed that Putin is not seeking peace, but rather a chance to weaken Western unity and spread propaganda. He also said that they must maintain Western cohesion and keep supporting Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Czech foreign minister welcomed President Trump's efforts to pursue peace, but dismissed Putin's narrative as Kremlin propaganda, warning against buying into it while it strikes on Ukraine. On another hand, Lithuania's defense minister struck a sharply critical tone, accusing Putin of gaslighting and issuing veiled threats, stating that while the meeting took place, Moscow continued its attacks on Ukraine. Okay, we are now once again joined by Dr. Ajay Dua. Can I get you to weigh in on this? The statements from mainly Eastern European countries, the countries that raise the most risk when it comes to security from Russia. Obviously, some commending Donald Trump's efforts to bring peace to Ukraine. However, once again, them dismissing Putin's narrative as Russian propaganda. Dr. Ajay Dua, how do you see this?
As I mentioned, President Putin seems to have endeavored to widen the scope of the discussions by talking about the US-Russia relationships, economic relations, business and other relationship issues. He's tried to raise the issue of nuclear weapons, whether it's talking about proliferation, whether it's talking about disarmament, etc., one doesn't know. And rightly so, I would say President Trump's team said all those, as important as they might be, we will take these up later. Let's now first talk about Ukraine and how to bring about peace there. So to that extent, I would say President Putin was checked. He tried to tickle, in some ways, President Trump's ego by saying, had he been there, and it was not President Biden when the war started, then things would have been different, that President Trump wouldn't have taken the war to this stage, and support. What he's really meaning is supported it so extensively. The question is, President Putin realized that President Trump likes to have his ego kind of, fettered at the drop of a hat, and he played that card. And he's also talked about earlier, reportedly, because these are the leaks which are coming out of the press conference from there, and President Trump, in return, requested President Putin to talk first to the press, not he himself. And he talked broadly. So you might find substance in it, you may not find any substance, but I think in the press conference, probably Putin handled himself well. But what happened during the negotiations is anybody's guess. And I would think that focusing on Ukraine and Ukraine alone should be the agenda when they meet in Moscow. Nothing else. If the interested party, the most interested party is Ukraine, President Zelensky and his team, and they must be on the table. And since NATO is out of Europe,
yes,
maybe some leaders of Europe and probably NATO also. But President Trump is going to again hear what President Putin seems to have raised there. He says we must address the root issue. That means the expansion of NATO eastwards. That is something which was not taken up, but a demand certainly got made.
Yes,
So
Dr. Dua, unfortunately we are running out of time. I just want one final question for Julia Kazdabina. How important has European unity been for Ukraine in this conflict? And do you think Ukrainians would welcome a direct trilateral summit that included President Zelensky, but along with President Trump and President Putin?
Well, Ukrainians would definitely welcome a summit like this, but definitely not in Moscow, because can you really trust Putin or Russia with everything they've done? I don't think Moscow is the right place for a meeting like this. It could be pretty much any other place, but definitely not Moscow. And I think that President Putin offering to have it in Moscow is actually trying to undermine it immediately and trying to set up the situation when President Zelensky is going to say, no, I'm not coming. So making it a lot more difficult. And again, it's an indication that he's not interested. When it comes to European unity, it's clearly very important for Ukraine. And European position is informed by the previous experience of negotiating with Russia and dealing with all the tricks that Russia plays in the course of negotiations, and also by the increasing realization that Russia poses a threat to Europe, because despite of all these feigned peace talks, they continue to build up their military, they continue to build up their defense production, they continue to make deals with China, with North Korea, they continue involving North Korean soldiers into the war with Ukraine. They're building up their northern military district, which is close to the Baltic states, and they're also conducting this, will conduct this military exercise with Belarus, and reportedly are going to practice nuclear strikes. So they continue their aggressive policy, and it has nothing to do with NATO posing a threat to Russia. It has to do with Russian imperial ambitions and trying to replay the end of the Cold War.
Thank you very much, Julia. I want to thank all my guests in this discussion, Rohan Gunaratne, Julia Kazdabina, and, of course, Dr. Ajay Jua. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world. Thank you very much for joining us.